Welcome everyone to Daf Yomi 1 week at a time, Masechet Sotah. Today is our third class, and today we're going to be reviewing Daf 14 through 20. I hope everyone had a wonderful Pesach. Tonight is we're already nighttime, so in Israel it's already Yom HaShoah, so Holocaust Remembrance Day. So I'm just putting it out there that it's a very powerful day, and maybe may the memories of the 6 million Jews give us an inspiration to continue learning and continue strengthening ourselves. Okay, Daf 14. We were in the middle of discussing the death of Moshe, and we actually mentioned that nobody knows where Moshe is buried. 1 second. Zohar asked that we dedicate our learning to her father, so may he have a refuah shlema. Okay, so the Gemara tells us that nobody really knows where Moshe is buried. And from here, since we're talking about the burial of Moshe, and if you remember last week, we said that it was actually God that buried Moshe. So now we have a very famous Gemara. So we're on Daf 14. The Gemara says that we are meant to follow God, to emulate him, to go in his ways. And the Gemara asks, how can we go in his ways? Isn't God, all powerful and a fiery fire? And the Gemara explains that the way we emulate God is by looking at his actions. And we are meant to emulate those actions. And the Gemara gives us examples. God clothed the naked, meaning Adam and Chava, Adam and Eve. They did not have clothing, and then God made clothes for them. Therefore, we need to clothe the naked, right? We say every morning, God is Malbish Arumim, right? God clothes the naked people. So too, we are meant to dress people who need clothing. The Gemara continues that God, he visits the sick, right? He visits Abraham after the circumcision, after the Brit Milah. Therefore, we have to visit the sick. God went to comfort the mourner, which is Yitzchak, after Abraham died. So too, we have a commandment or a charge to try to comfort mourners. God buried Moshe, and this is why it's here. Therefore, we have a commandment to bury our dead as well. So this idea, I think when you sum up these types of commandments, these mitzvot are what we would call gemilut chasadim, acts of kindness. And these we learn, right? There's no mitzvah, there's no commandment. The Torah doesn't say one must visit the sick. Rather, the Gemara tells us it's learnt from the actions of God, and if God can do it, so should we. So those are many acts of kindness that God did, and therefore we need to emulate them. The Gemara tells us that the Chumash, the Torah, begins with an act of kindness, right? Clothing Adam and Eve, and it ends with an act of kindness, which is the burying of Moshe, right? And this is a beautiful book ending of the Torah. I think when many of us think of the Torah, we think of a book of laws or maybe a book of our history. But here I think the Gemara is saying that it's actually a book of acts of kindness, of ways to emulate God in this world, and many of those things are through caring for one another. I think it's a very, very powerful message. With that, we finished the first chapter of Masechet Sotah, and now we are going to begin the second chapter. I think we might even finish it. Yes, we're also going to finish it tonight. So we are continuing in the process of the Sotah. We discussed what leads up to the ceremony, and now we're going to go through the ceremony. So the Mishnah tells us that the husband brings his wife to the temple, and at the temple he brings, or they bring, a mincha offering, a grain offering, and it's brought in a palm basket, meaning in a very simple basket. And she's meant to hold this basket for the entire ceremony. Now, if you remember, we discussed last week, a main part of this ceremony is meant to tire her out so that if she was guilty, she'll be so tired that she's just going to admit her guilt. Again, and I'll mention it again, but we mentioned it last week. It's important to recognize, as much as this does seem very jarring, it's important to recognize that if the woman was innocent, this is her way of proving her innocence. So that's just important to keep in mind as we read about this very. I guess I'll say challenging ceremony, and we'll see the details. So they bring this sacrifice. It's unique in that it doesn't start off in what's called a kli sharet, meaning a utensil of the temple. It is brought in this basket, as I've mentioned before, and it does not have oil or livona. I think it's frankincense. I think it's livona. So those were generally added. Oil and livona were added to all grain offerings, to the mincha offering. For the sotah, it is not added. And also, the sacrifice is comprised of barley as opposed to wheat. Okay. And just as, so the Gemara says, what does it mean that it's, or why is it made out of barley? Because, again, in those days, barley was really animal food. And the Mishnah ends by saying that just as she acted, I guess it says like an animal, but I think that it means giving into her animal desire, more base desires, right? She wasn't faithful to. So one is her base desires. Another idea is that she acted in animal-like, in the sense that she wasn't faithful to her mate, right? Many animals don't have. Some do, but many don't have one mate that they mate with forever. So therefore, her sacrifice is brought from animal food, which is barley. Okay. The Gemara says, again, as I mentioned, that we tire her out so that she will confess. We want her to tell the truth. Again, we don't want her to die, and therefore we want to prevent her from drinking the water. As we'll see, they have lethal effects. So we're trying to prevent her from this end, and therefore we want her to admit what she did. The Gemara here goes through the regular procedure of a mincha offering, of the grain offering, and how it's different to the sotah. So it's important to recognize that a regular mincha is brought in a gold or silver utensil. As I mentioned, you add oil and livona. It's given at a certain place, and one second. And you take off, right, what's called a kometz, which means like a handful, and that's burnt on the top of the mizbeach and of the altar. And then the sorry, one second. Okay. Then the priests, the kohanim, can eat whatever's left over by adding wine or oil or honey, as long as it's not chametz, right? As long as it is not does not become chametz. So again, as we see, this is given in gold and silver. This one is in this palm utensil. And when you take the regular grain offering, you move the livona to the side, and then it's only added afterwards, and then that part is put in another sanctified vessel, and then that is brought to the altar. Da 15 says that again, as we said, you take the komets, the handful, up to the altar. You add salt, and then you put it on the fire. Um, and the Gemara finishes off by telling us that there were certain sacrifices that were different. So that was what happens in general. Certain sacrifices are different. If someone brought a grain offering as a sin offering, a minchat choteh, so that one is brought without oil or livona, but it's made out of wheat, so that's a little bit different. The omer, so that's very fitting for now, right? We are in what we call Spirat HaOmer, where we count the 49 days from Pesach to Shavuot. What's important to understand is that why is it called the Omer? Because there was a sacrifice brought every day in the temple for 49 days, and this sacrifice was barley. It's a count, the Omer was barley. So here it's barley, but it did have oil and livona. So again, it had some things like a regular mincha and some things that were different, as opposed to our mincha of the sotah, which was barley and didn't have oil and livona. The idea here is oil and livona are a way to beautify the sacrifice, and right now we are not beautifying her sacrifice. Okay, I see a question from Lynn. How could one accused be humiliated as if guilty before the case is concluded? We know we're protecting dignity at all costs, especially the innocent accused. It's an excellent, excellent question, Lynn. I definitely do not have all the answers. I think this is something we are going to be at least I'm struggling with. I will say, however, it's important to understand that no one is completely innocent. If you remember, the way we got to this situation was that the husband suspected his wife of being inappropriate and told her not to, not to see this man. And she is seen, again, there are witnesses that see her secluding with this man. So it doesn't mean that she went to work and he was there. It means they went to a motel room. It means they went to, something like that, meaning they're in a place that they shouldn't be. They're alone for a certain amount of time. Again, you're correct, meaning it doesn't mean that something happened. And we're definitely used to innocent until proven guilty. But I think it's important to recognize that no one is innocent, right? No one is really, it's not a good relationship to begin with. Um, and it's not completely one-sided. I don't know if that answers your question. I agree with you, that this is very challenging. It is also important to recognize that at any point she does not have to admit guilt. We're going to see this in a little bit. She could just say, forget it. Let's just get divorced. So that's also important to understand. She does lose her ketuvah money, but she doesn't have to go through this ceremony. It's not a punishment. It's not, it's not like court ordered. She can say, I don't want to do it. And we saw that last week, right? She can refuse, he can refuse. There are consequences, but it is difficult. I'll agree with that. And yes, okay, excellent. So I hope that answers a little bit. Next Mishnah on Daf 15. Again, it's just getting worse. So I agree with you. And okay, the Mishnah says they fill up an earthenware vial with water from the kior. The kior is the basin of water in the Beit Hamikdash, in the temple, and the Kohen would go into the temple area and on into the temple itself. And on the right side, the Mishnah describes that there's a tile on the floor with a ring, and they would lift up the tile and they would take the dirt from underneath that tile and put it in this vial of water. So now the Gemara explains this needs to be a new vial, not like a new earthenware vessel, not something old and dirty and used. It needs to be new. Or it could be slightly used, just it can't be like black with soot, because the only thing that could be in it is the water, the dirt, and we'll see soon the ink. And there's a machloket if they need to use spring water or the water from the basin. And we're going to see that we're going to compare this with the ceremony for the mitzorah, for the leper, a person who got tzaraat. Again, it's important to understand tzaraat is not regular leprosy that you can look up online. This was a form of leprosy, but it was a spiritual illness. And to get out of that, to not to be healed, meaning once the person was healed, there was a ceremony to bring them back into the community, and it also involved an earthenware vessel and water. So that's where this is. We're going to compare the two things. There's a question if the dirt has to come from, as we mentioned, the temple ground, or can it be brought from outside? Daf 16 tells us no. We do the ceremony in the Mishkan, in the tabernacle, before there was a Beit HaMikdash, and in the temple itself, and you cannot bring dirt from your house. You needed to take it from the temple courtyard, from the temple area. From here, and again, I think this is very powerful, especially teaching this on Yom HaShoah. The word for dirt is afar. Afar, spelt with an ayin. The word for ashes is afer. Afer, spelt with an aleph. So they sound very similar. You might remember Abraham actually says, right, when he stands before God, Anochi afar ve'efer, right? I am dirt, or comprised, or I'm nothing but dirt and ashes. So since we're talking about dirt, the Gemara asks, can we use ashes instead of dirt? Actually, just as an aside, I actually go with my students every year to Poland on a Poland trip, and I actually quote this verse standing at the end of Majdanek, the death camp. There is a huge pile of ashes that was collected right after the war from the crematorium, and there's a memorial there, and I talk about this verse of Anochi Afar Ve'efer, right? That we are humbled. We are humbled in our lives, and we're humbled when we think about all of this loss. So sorry if that was too graphic, but still important to remember. Okay. Here, again, as I mentioned, so the Gemara asks if we can use this, if we can use ashes. Here the Gemara seems to say no, you have to use dirt and not ashes. As I mentioned, the Gemara does compare now Sotah, the ceremony that we have, with the ceremony for the mitzorah, for the leper, and interestingly, right, if you remember, we talked about this ceremony for the Mitzorah because he shaved his head, just like the Nazir. That was our last Masechet. Um, and the Gemara concludes that we cannot use ashes, only dirt, right? Only afar, and not afer. Um, okay. The Now the Gemara tells us that three things need to be visible in this vial. We need sorry, three things need to be visible in different ceremonies. One is the dirt that is placed in the water for the sotah. The second is, and here is the ashes of the para aduma, the red heifer, if you remember, we talked about these ashes were used to purify people who were impure from a dead body to matmet. So you need to see the ashes on top of the water and the bit of the woman who's doing chalitza. Do you remember in Masechet Yevamot, we talked about the woman whose husband died and she didn't have any children. If she didn't want to do yibum, then she would do chalitza. That ceremony involved her spitting in front of her brother-in-law. So we have to actually see the spittle. Um, some people some also add that you need to see the blood of the bird in the mitzorah, in the leper ceremony as well. This blood is put into the water as well. Um, Here, the Gemara discusses, we mentioned that there needs to be the water and then the dirt. The Gemara discusses, does it have to be exactly in that order? Can you put the dirt in first and then the water? So the sages say that you have to put the earth on top of the water, and you can't do it the opposite. Rabbi Shimon says actually you can. And he learns this from the ashes of the para aduma, of the red heifer, that so too there the ashes needed to be placed on top of the water. But if you did it in the wrong order, it still works. Rabbi Shimon said so too here with the sotah. If you did it in the wrong order, it still works. The Chachamim, the sages, disagree and say that it must be in this order. Okay, Daf 17, the Mishnah tells us the next step in the process is that the Kohen needs to write a scroll. Again, scroll, we'll see in a minute, means to write on parchment. All the verses from the Torah that talk about the Sotah ceremony. If you look in Bamidbar, in the book of Numbers, chapter 5, we have towards the end of the chapter a description of the ceremony. And here we're going to see different opinions on what he has to write. So one is the entire verse, meaning from verse 19 to 22. And the Mishnah quotes the verses. He doesn't write the verses that instruct the woman to take an oath. He just writes down the actual oath itself. Rabbi Yossi actually says that he writes the entire passage, meaning from the beginning till the end. Rabbi Yehuda says he only writes down the curse. That's chapter 5, verse 22, kaf bet, and that is the actual curse itself of what is going to happen to this woman if she is actually guilty. The Gemara explains that the machloket really is when the Torah says, and the Kohen should write the curse, right? What does it mean? Only the curse, everything around it, and that is the difference of opinion. Here, another very famous line in the Talmud, Rabbi Akiva says, if you take the letters of a man and a woman, Ish and Isha, right? So they have very similar letters, right? Aleph and Shin. The difference is a Yud and a Hey, right? So Rabbi Akiva says if the husband and wife are meritorious, right? If they have a schut, if they have merit, so then God's presence rests between them, right? The Yud and the Hey, that makes God's name. However, right, if you take God's name, the Yud, out of Ish, if you take out the Yud, you get Ish, right? Ish is fire. Um, so Rabbi Akiva says that if they do not, maybe treat each other properly or have a good relationship, so then fire is going to consume them. Um, and okay, so now we're back to then the Gemara says that. We use the dirt, right? The afar. And here the Gemara says, and we mentioned this tangentially beforehand, that if the woman is meritorious, if she has a schut, a merit, um, so then she will have a child like Avraham, right? So if she is innocent and she has merit, so she, right, again, as I mentioned, Abraham says, Anochi afar va'efer, right? I like the dirt and the ashes. So we use the dirt to say that if she was really innocent, she's going to have a child like Abraham. If not, she's going to return to the dirt, meaning she is going to die. What's the verse when Abraham says, "I am like the dirt and the ashes"? It reminds us that right, what the dirt reminds us of the Sotah ceremony, and the ashes remind us of the Para Aduma, what I mentioned before, the ashes of the red heifer. Okay, the next Mishnah tells us that a Kohen must write on a finished parchment. As I mentioned before, when we use the word scroll, it means a parchment that was finished. It's called a Megillah. We'll see what that means in a minute by finished, because the verse says in a sefer, in a book, and a book like Sefer Torah. It has to be a finished parchment, and it must be written with ink, and that ink needs to be erasable, right? If you use a permanent ink, right, a permanent marker, that doesn't work because the whole point is we want to dissolve the letters into the water, which we didn't get to just yet. So the Gemara explains what this means. It must be written. So first of all, he has to write this scroll during the day, because it's compared to a Torah. Torah is compared to judgment, mishpat, and we know that judgment was only done during the day. You could not judge a court case at night. I think this is brilliant, right? People are tired at night. They just want to go home. That is never a good time to sit in judgment. Therefore, judgment is always done during the day. We talked about the verses that need to be written. The Gemara tells us that they must be written in order. You can't do it out of order, just like a Torah. It has to be written after she accepts the oath, right? The Kohen is going to make her take an oath. He can only write it after she accepts the oath. If not, it's invalid. What did it mean that the parchment was finished? It means that it needed to have lines etched in it. If you've ever seen a cloth, a parchment, before they write for a Sefer Torah, for a Torah scroll, or even if you've seen a completed one or a mezuzah or tefillin, it has lines etched in it. What interesting fact, the letters don't sit on the line. The line is above, meaning the line is where the letter starts, not where the letter sits. So that's just an interesting idea about writing a Torah scroll. It has to be written. Daf 18 tells us it has to be written in one column. It can't be multiple columns. Um, and it has to be written entirely and then erased entirely. You can't like write a word, erase the word, write a word, erase the word. Um, Here, the Gemara now asks a series of questions. Can you write two separate Megillot for two women? Remember, we said we can't do one ceremony for two women, but let's say we do two ceremonies at the same time. What if we write two separate scrolls for two women and then we put them in the same water? Can you erase them together? Right? Or does each one need an individual vial? Or if, let's say, you say that they're erased in two separate cups, then can you combine them together? Right? Does the woman need to drink from only her water, or can she drink from someone else's as well? And whenever we have a series of questions, we know to assume that it's going to end in teku, which means we are waiting till Eliyahu Hanavi comes to answer all of our questions. Okay, the Sotah now takes, or before they wrote the scroll, the Sotah takes two oaths. One before the scroll is erased, and one after. The Gemara says, wait a minute, what are you saying? No, they have to both be before it's erased, but one of the oaths has a curse and the other doesn't. Um, okay, right, and the Gemara explains how does she take this oath, right? So she swears that she didn't become defiled, and if she did, then the water is going to bring all of these terrible things to her. Okay, the next Mishnah continues that the Kohen says the oath out loud, and then she says amen, right, which means she agrees to the oath, to each part. So she says amen, amen. Remember we said it's two oaths, so she says amen twice. Amen. So she says amen for the two oaths. Now the Mishnah says, well, if it's already for two oaths, let's say that she's also saying amen for other things. What is she saying? Amen that she didn't sleep with this man, or any other man. Um, Amen that she didn't have an affair when she was engaged or when she was married, right? Like two separate things. And here we have the concept, in Hebrew it's called Gilgul Shvuot, which means that we're rolling over oaths. What does that mean? Um, the the idea is that once somebody is biblically mandated to take an oath, a person can add to the formula, and have the person swear on other things that weren't necessarily included in the original idea, right? So again, in theory, she's only taking an oath from this man, right? The man that he was concerned about, in this marriage. It has nothing to do with what if before she was married or another man, but the Mishnah says he can add in other things. Again, they have to be related. They can't say and swear that you didn't eat the last ice cream from the freezer. He can't do that, but it needs to be related. Um, and and he can add it, right? Amen that she didn't have an affair, and that she won't have one in the future. That's very interesting. The Gemara is going to question, like, what does this mean? Maybe, right, the let's say, right, how can he make her swear about something in the future, and then if he does, what does that mean for the water? Maybe it can uh, postpone the effects till later, maybe. The The Mishnah, though, says he cannot add something from before they were engaged, because there was no relationship, or after she gets divorced. Meaning, as long as they're in a relationship, he can add things there, but not from before or after, right? Because she was not prohibited to him before or after. So now the Gemara says um, that the Mishnah also mentioned that he can also say, while you're waiting to do Yibum, did you have an affair? Which means to imply that this husband can also be the Yavam, right? The man that she marries, that she does Yibum. Um, and that seems to imply that he can make her swear about that time period when before they were married, but when she was still connected to him. It also seems to say, the Gemara asks, can he make her swear about their first marriage together if in the meantime they got divorced and then got remarried? Or right? Uh, can the Yavam, right? Again, this is the brother-in-law, make her swear about what happened during her marriage to his brother, meaning the original relationship. And the Gemara answers yes, he can um, add these oaths as well. He could stipulate about a future marriage that he will have with her. Um, and from here, the Gemara asks, right, can a woman be a sota more than once? Maybe it only works once, or maybe it only works once with this husband. But if she gets divorced and gets married again, it can happen again as well. Or again, there's another opinion that no, it only happens once. Um, if it's the same husband and the same adulterer, uh, so then for sure she cannot be made to drink again, right? I guess we would call it double jeopardy, right? Once she's brought for that relationship, that's it. That's the end. And everybody agrees with it. There's a machloket. What if it's a different husband and a different adulterer? Or again, sorry, if it's a different husband and a different adulterer, everyone agrees that she can be made to drink again. The machloket is two husbands and the same adulterer, or one husband and two adulterers. So that would be a machloket. And that is the end of the second chapter. So we just finished a whole chapter. Okay, Daf 19. The Mishnah says we're continuing in the ceremony. The Kohen takes her mincha, her grain offering, and places it. Remember, it was in this palm bowl or utensil. Now it's placed in a kli sharet, in a temple vessel, and then he puts it back in her hands, and then the Kohen puts his hand under hers and they wave it. This is called tnufa. Tnufa means that they wave it up and down and side to side. It's part of the sacrificial process or ceremony. And then he takes it by himself to the altar, to the mizbeach, and he waves it there by himself. Then he takes a kometz, which means a handful of the grain, and that is put on the mizbeach, on the altar, and the rest is eaten by the kohanim. And here, the end of the Mishnah says that there's a machloket if they make her drink before the offering is sent or after, right? The order is a little bit unclear. It's unclear because of the verses in the Torah seem to be a little bit out of order. Okay, the Gemara tells us that the Torah teaches that the Sotah and the Kohen must wave the mincha, so they have to actually do it together. the sages say that she drinks first and then they bring the offering. Rabbi Shimon says they do the offering and then she drinks. But as we mentioned before, Rabbi Shimon says if they did the opposite, it's valid. So if you remember, the Rabbi Shimon was said before also, if you switch the order, it's valid. Um, Second, I see a question. Um, um, Interesting. Lynn is asking if the woman we have to make sure that she's not a nida. That is an excellent question. The Gemara is actually going to talk about that. But yes, she cannot be menstruating at the time of the ceremony because she needs to be in the um, um, right outside the temple courtyard, meaning at Sha'ar Nicanor, which we mentioned last week at the gates of Nicanor, which means that she cannot be impure um, from Nida. So that is an excellent question. We're going to get to that in the Gemara as well. I think we get to that today. Yes, at the end of today's class, we are going to talk about that. Okay. Um, Ah, so now the Gemara tells us, remember we said she drinks and brings the sacrifice. If they already, we didn't mention it, but after the scroll is written, it's dipped into the water, remember the vial of water, till the ink dissolves. And part of that is that God's name gets dissolved into the water to show how serious this is. I mean, we didn't mention it yet, but so here the Gemara refers to this by saying that if they already erased God's name and then she refuses to drink, so then we actually make her drink. Remember, we said we don't want her to die unnecessarily. We want her to admit it. But if we've already gone through the entire process, now she has to drink it. That's according to Rabbi Kiva. Or she can't drink it till she can say that she doesn't want to drink it till the offering is sacrificed, right? And then then the scroll is erased, and then she takes the oath. So again, all of these things happen before she drinks it. But if at any moment she says she doesn't want to do it, then we don't make her drink it. It says that they make her drink the water 3 times. It says it 3 times, and that's to teach us 3 different things. Again, the 3 different things are that she can't drink it till the offering was made, that the scroll is erased, and she takes the oath, right? She needs those 3 things. As I mentioned, there's a machloket if we force her to drink the water. Again, if the whole point is to get her to say she's guilty, then it should be enough for her to refuse to drink, right? That's an admission of guilt. Or no, right? Maybe she can refuse even if the scroll is erased, but till the mincha is offered, meaning if the sacrifice is brought on the mizbeach, that's it. Now she has to drink. Or as long as she's clear-headed, meaning not out of fright, but if she's clear-headed, she can refuse at any point. And again, I think that this is important. We don't want her to die unnecessarily. So it's interesting that this is here, that she can refuse at any point. But again, if it's out of fear, right, before the offering was burnt, then she can refuse, but after, no. And here it seems to be that the fear is, even if she's, right, again, why would she refuse to drink it? One is, and that's going to be the next Mishnah, is it an admission of guilt, or is it that she's just so scared? So that's important to understand. So Daf 20 tells us, and this is actually tomorrow's Daf, so you'll be ahead. So Daf 20 tells us that if she refuses to drink, and then she says, okay, fine, I will drink, then the question is, Is it an admission of guilt, meaning when she refused to drink at the first place? Is that an admission of guilt and then she can't drink anymore? Or does it just show that she was scared and now she's like, fine, I'll do it, right? And again, here we end with teku. We're not sure the answer to this. Um, Shmuel's father said that they should add something bitter to the water because in the Torah it's called Maim Marim, right? Bitter water. I imagine that dirt and ink make it bitter enough, but he said to add even more. Okay, the last Mishnah for today on Daf 20 again says what we just been discussing. As long as the scroll hasn't been erased, she can say, I refuse to drink. And again, if she refuses, then the husband divorces her and she doesn't get the ktuva money. The scroll is then hidden away, what we would call gniza, right? It's buried, it's put away. It has sanctity because it has God's name in it. And her offering, her mincha offering, is placed on what's called the deshen. Deshen is the pile of ashes that was in the temple area, meaning it's not burnt on the altar. Rather, it's placed on the ashes, meaning what we would call it's like thrown in the garbage. Not really because it has sanctity, but we do not bring the offering if she stops the ceremony at any point. You cannot use the scroll for any other sotah. It needs to be written just for her. And if the scroll was erased, and then she says, I can't do this anymore. I'm guilty. Now, there's a difference. Before, she just refused to drink. She didn't say she was guilty. Now, let's say it was erased, and she says, stop, stop, stop. I don't want to die. I'm guilty. So then again, we stop the ceremony. The water is spilled out, and the mincha, the offering, goes on the ashes. If it was erased, and she refuses to drink. Now, she doesn't admit it. She just refuses. And it was already erased. We actually force her to drink. And here, it's not because we want her to die. We think, and I think this is the idea, the Mishnah, I think, is saying, we think that really she's innocent. Otherwise, she wouldn't have gone through this whole thing. And now she's just scared, right? Even though she's told that everything is going to be good, you never know, and she's scared. So we force her because we want her to be proven innocent, as Lynn had mentioned before, right? We want her to go through with it so that people don't think that she's guilty just by being scared. If now, okay, let's say now she drinks the water, not the woman who refuses, meaning the regular sotah drinks the water. As soon as she drinks it, she is cursed, and the body reacts. The Mishnah goes through very graphically what happens. Her eyes bulge and her veins protrude, and she looks like everything is going to explode on the spot. So the Mishnah says they quickly rush her out of the courtyard because we don't want her to die in the temple. We don't want her to contaminate the area. So we'll get back to that in a minute. Now, here's the very, I think, a fascinating point, and we mentioned this previously, but this is the source. The Mishnah says, again, very famously, if she has merit, right, if she has a schut, it delays the effect of the water, meaning even if she had an affair, but she has some sort of merit, we're going to discuss what that is, then the effects are delayed. It does not mean that she's not going to die. She will, but not here at this place. And the schut, based on how much merit she has, can delay it up to 3 years. And therefore, very famous line, Ben Azai says, one must teach his daughter Torah so that she has the merit that if chas v'shalom she's ever a sotah, she will have the merit that will help her. This is going to get into a very famous machloket. The next line is, Rabbi Eliezer says, what do you mean? Teach your daughter Torah? How could you say such a thing? And the line in Hebrew is Kol hamilamed bito Torah lomda tiflut. Right? If you teach your daughter Torah, it's as if, oh well, I added the as if because the Gemara is going to add the word as if, but it's you are teaching her tiflut. The question is, what does the word tiflut mean? There's a wide range of explanations. One explanation is it's going to lead to her immorality. It's going to lead to physical intimacy. Maybe it means you're teaching her emptiness, right? Maybe, right, the idea of in one ear, out the other. But this gets into a very fascinating discussion. Are women allowed to learn Torah? This is a podcast uh, taught by a woman, given to many women. So I think we all agree that, or we'll see that there's definitely an opinion that says you should teach your daughters Torah, and it will give us merit, be'ezrat Hashem. But we'll discuss it more. Um, okay, the Mishnah then lists people who are insincere and deceptive and says that these people lead to the destruction of the world. We're going to get to that in next week's class. Okay, the Gemara now explains that Rabbi Meir says that he used to put something in his ink. Rabbi Meir was a scribe. And he used to put something in his ink so that the letters would be permanent, right? So he used to write with permanent marker, right, or permanent ink. And he did this in front of Rabbi Akiva, his teacher, and Rabbi Akiva didn't say anything, meaning that you shouldn't do it. But then he went to Rabbi Ishmael, and he told him, no, the letters need to be able to be erased. Therefore, you cannot use this substance that makes it permanent. And here we see that basically Rabbi Meir learned from two very great scholars, Rabbi Ishmael and Rabbi Akiva. There's a machloket who he learned from first, but here we see that so the question is for maybe it's a machloket for Sefer Torah if you can use this permanent ink, but definitely not for the Sotah. There's a machloket if you need to write the scroll lishma, meaning with proper intent for each Sotah woman, or maybe what can you use? Let's say there's an old Torah scroll there. Can you use like a piece of the Torah scroll if it's exactly the verses that you need? And again, it seems that it needs to be written with intent, intent for that woman, just like a get, just like a bill of divorce. It needs to be right. It says vikatav la. It needs to be written for that specific woman. So let's say you are right, Yosef, who's married to Leah, and you find in the garbage a get that says Yosef wants to divorce Leah, you cannot use it, right? You need to have it written specifically for that person. We said again that when she drinks, she gets punished right away. Rabbi Shimon doesn't he doesn't agree with this idea of merit, meaning if she's guilty, she's punished right away. If she's innocent, she's not. As opposed to what we just read in the Mishnah, that there is this idea of merit. And the daf ends with this idea of, remember we said she has to go out, right? Again, maybe she'll die. And the Gemara says, wait a minute, why are you so concerned about her dying? A dead body, it's not a problem for a dead body to be in the temple area. This is actually learned from the bones of Yosef. If you remember last week, we talked about Moshe having an aron, a coffin, I guess, right, with the bones of Yosef, and it was with him all the time, in his tent, and that tent is what's called the Levite camp, Machane Leviah, and that is the area of Har Habayit, so the Temple Mount. So why would it be a problem if she died? So the Gemara says, and this is what Lynn asked about beforehand. No, we're not concerned. I mean, we're concerned, but we don't take her out because we're concerned she's going to die. We're concerned she's going to menstruate. Part of this is that, like, her uterus falls out, or she starts to bleed, and that is a problem, right? A woman who is menstruating, a nida, is not allowed to be on the Temple Mount, and therefore we take her off right away. The top of Daf 21 tells us again this idea of merit. The merit can push off the punishment either 3, 9, or 12 months. Our Mishnah actually says 1, 2, or 3 years. And this is actually learned from Nebuchadnezzar, who had some merit, and therefore his punishment was pushed off a year. But our Mishnah says up to 3 years. So with that, we are going to finish. One second, I see Lynn asked a question. Some say she might refuse to make no contest in order to get away from an abusive or intolerable husband, since if proven innocent, she's sent back to him and she's not allowed to. Right. Interesting tactic. Did the sages discuss okay. Excellent question, Lynn. Lynn is asking if maybe, right, she would now refuse so she can get out of her marriage. It's an excellent question. And again, I think that, as I think I mentioned this last week, there is definitely an unhealthy relationship here. And I think that this ceremony is a way for that relationship to be resolved. Again, resolved has different ways, right? One is exactly like you said, she can refuse, but the truth is, if she was going to refuse, she should have refused already at home. If you remember, we said she's taken to court. She can just say, I admit it, or right, and get out of the marriage, and she doesn't have to go all the way to Jerusalem and go through this entire process. But let's say she decides that she needs to get out of this relationship at any point she can. So correct. What is fascinating, you mentioned, did anyone ever use this as a tactic? If you remember, we actually learned in Masechet Brachot, so it's been a while, it's been 3.5 years, but in Masechet Brachot, we learned about Chana. Chana, who wanted a child, she's the mother of Shmuel, the prophet. And if you remember, the Midrash actually says, right, she says, you know what? I want a child, and you know what? I have a great plan. I'm going to get my husband to suspect me of being an adulteress. I'm obviously not going to have an affair, but I'm going to put myself in the situation, and I'm going to be innocent, and he's going to take me to the temple, and I'm going to drink the water. And one of the brachot, if you remember, we didn't learn it in the Mishnah yet, but the Gemara alluded to it, is that if she's innocent and she drinks the water, she will have a child. And she's like, you know what? I'll just do that. If you don't want me to do that, then do me a favor and give me a child now. So it's interesting, Lynn, you mentioned, did anybody ever use it? It seems definitely Chazal, the sages don't use it as a way out or solution, but Chana does. Or again, maybe it's the sages putting it into her words, but it's not the clear, the pshat, as we would say. It's not the clear understanding of her conversation with God, but it is interesting. So again, and I'm going to just keep saying this, right? We are hit with the very shocking ceremony and the effects that it has. But as Lynn mentioned, it's a way to get out of an abusive relationship. B, it's a way to have a child. So there are a lot of implications. I think there's a lot here. There's a lot of depth here. And I think that we would be remiss if we didn't think about the depth. I think, unfortunately, many times we hear this and we're so shocked. We say, I can't believe the Torah is so harsh, and I can't believe that they would do such a thing. But I think we have to remember all the details. So, yes. Any other questions?
Yes,
Uh,
it's not a question, but I just want to say thank you because now when I see Sota, I don't have this horrible negative feeling, and I didn't even know very much about it. It is, there's actually a lot of kindness in it.
Exactly. I once heard an excellent class by a good friend of mine, Yael Leibowitz. She said, if you read, she's very into comparing the Torah with what was happening at the time. If you read the Code of Hammurabi, if a woman was suspected of adultery, she was killed. There was not a lot to get out of it. And she's saying that it's, again, like exactly as you said, Aliza, the idea is that this is actually seen as kind. We're giving the woman the ability to prove her innocence. Again, not in the most um, uh, compassionate way, but still, I think it is interesting. I always tell students, when you read it in the Torah, it's very stark. It's very I don't know if the word is violent, but it's very jarring. But when you learn the Masechet, you really see that there's a lot more here. Exactly as you said, there's sensitivity, there's depth, there's complexity. We're going to learn. I'm not sure if we said it already, but we're going to learn that if the husband had an affair, then it doesn't work, right? So there's a lot here. So yes, that is definitely one of my goals here. Is that exactly as you said, that when you hear the word sota, you're not revolt, but you know you there is some sensitivity. There's kindness. There's a way out. So yes, uh, yes. Thank you. Any other questions or comments?
I just wanted to say that there's an issue in the Gemara. It says that you're not supposed to teach women Gemara because Nashim Datan Kalotena, that they're fickle or whatever, silly. So or let's put it lightheaded. So and they wouldn't take it seriously. But I'm mentioning this because when my father sat down and started teaching me Mishnayos, he started off with this sentence, and he says,
Wow.
when the Gemara said this, they weren't talking about you.
Wow. Beautiful.
And
Beautiful.
so, yes, yes. Unfortunately,
Wow.
my father is now intubated and in an induced coma. And
Oy.
I just hope he has a refuah shlema, and
Wow. Wow.
he he's out of this.
Mhm.
He should just have a refuah shlema, and may this learning that we learned today be a merit for him, and it
Amen.
may have a speedy and full recovery.
Amen.
Um, okay. Um, okay.